The SEO Weekly is back, and there are so many overlapping topics that we covered this week, whether it's structured data being rolled out for organizations and forums and communities, or how quality rater guidelines are being adjusted, and are they going to start using actual LLMs to label things? Very interesting conversation there. More stuff on the DOJ and antitrust and user behavior and how that influences SEO. And there was a dude who kind of made a comment about how he stole 3.6 billion visits and traffic using generative AI, and the SEO world had an issue with it. Was he wrong? Is he doing anything wrong? Is it a problem? Does it affect you? All that and so much more on the SEO Weekly. Welcome back to the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, and everything depends. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of iPullRank, and every week I cover everything going on in the world of SEO. We're talking Google updates, blog articles, webinars, podcasts, communities, SEO, Twitter, you name it, I'm on it. If you are into this, please subscribe to the channel, leave us a comment, yada, yada, YouTube stuff. But honestly, appreciate all the support. Let's dive into what's up with Google. So as we creep along to the end of 2023, Google is not done. Well, they are done. The November core 2023 algo update. It was completed on the 28th. Now we just sit and wait, kind of, sort of, because nobody can really wait. But, just anecdotally, looking at the Twitters, the X's, if you will, people are seeing ups and downs. They're not specifically seeing any sort of specifics. So if you expected AI content to automatically get hit really hard, anecdotally, there are some that have gotten knocked down a peg. We'll get into a story about that in a minute that's not related. But for the most part, there's still, sites that you generate a ton of AI content that are doing okay. Now, what Google has been rolling out, which is really interesting, is support for more structured data attributes. Over the last week, there was one around courses. Now they've come out and announced there's one around organizations, basically expanded details like address. Now, the way they position it is it'll help you in the rich results. For instance, in your knowledge panel, now you might see address and phone number and things that weren't included beyond the logo, for instance. And earlier in the month, there are actually a whole range of different business attributes in the merchant center for shopping and for small businesses. They actually added a small business attribute that could show up in product image results. So the big picture with all of this is, yes, benefits to rich results. Another one they had was forums, right? So showing how many followers or likes or things that you can mock up in forums, which we're already seeing on Twitter profiles, LinkedIn profiles, YouTube channel that show up in the search results that show how many subscribers or views for a given video. This is starting to appear in the search. But bigger picture, Google is trying to understand and really beef up the knowledge graph, all the information they have about the range of different businesses and websites and creators and authors, so much more info they're trying to collect, so that, and this is my conspiracy hat theory, but so they can provide more helpful information in generative AI and combine some of the SGE generative AI results with all of this knowledge graph information. And if this is really interesting to you in terms of how the AI, generative LLMs, and knowledge graphs work together, we're actually hosting a webinar on Thursday, December 14th at 12. You can register for free. If you can't make it, that's fine. We'll record it. But Andrea Volpini, the CEO of WordLift, and I are going to do this webinar all around how you can help Google and LLMs understand your business with AI. So we're going to dive in depth into all of the different structured data attributes and how you can build out what's called an ontology, labeling all these concepts and attributes and aspects of your website so Google and other LLMs can understand you better, which ultimately has a lot of value for traffic and rankings in terms of associating your business with other entities, with topics. So when someone's searching for something related, you're that much more likely to show up. Anyway, very interesting to see Google's kind of doubling down on kind of trying to get more businesses to add different structured data and attributes to their website so Google can understand them better. So one of the major narratives that's been happening over the course of 2023 is, are Google search results good? Are they getting better? Are they getting worse? We saw a lot of move towards incorporating more user-generated content, why like Reddit results or Quora results are skyrocketing to the top after all these algorithm updates. Well, a couple of really interesting articles came out over the past week on Search Engine Land. First was by Lily Ray, in which she highlighted some of the new changes to the Quality Rater Guidelines document. Basically, this is the 100+ page document that Google's 16,000 quality raters will use to evaluate sites to see if the results reflect the quality that Google is looking for. So they made updates to how to evaluate a forums page, how to identify what's actually a no simple query. So, whether or not someone wants to look for more information on a topic is more expansive than just a simple kind of featured snippet worthy type of content. Additionally, they went through search intents and like if there's just a minor different kind of interpretation, how that shouldn't necessarily influence the results. So if you're looking at, they give examples like looking at the word apple, looking at the company, looking at, the fruit, but then looking at someone's name, Apple, is less likely. It's more of a minor interpretation that while they do want helpful versions of that to be surfaced, they still shouldn't come at the same equal value as the main interpretation. So Lily Ray breaks down all these different like nuanced changes to the Quality Raters Guideline, which is always a series of clues for SEOs to understand what Google considers high quality, helpful content, what they're looking for. Now, remember, big caveat, these raters aren't going to individual sites and saying, okay, your site's helpful or unhelpful, and therefore you're getting rated by me, and that's going to affect your rankings. No, they're just looking generally if Google is getting it right in the results for a given query with the algorithm, that it's actually surfacing the most helpful, best content that would satisfy the user's intent. The second part of this, which I highly recommend, an epic article by Dawn Anderson, a Birdie SEO consultant. She is very much an academic, like in the weeds of reading papers and patents and insights. And she put together this epic 30-minute read, but all about quality raters and how Google and other search engines potentially are going to move away from individual people, humans in the loop, and move more towards using LLMs and AIs. The idea here is, can people and ultimately algorithms evaluate content using basically machine learning? Can they be trained to accurately identify labels and relevance and high quality content as well as, if not better, than humans? And up to this point, it didn't seem like it was possible with all of the specifics and all the nuances to content. But Bing released a paper using GPT-4, how in a lot of ways, it's at least around the same quality as humans. And if that's the case, it saves them a ton of money. They can scale it more effectively because right now, just having, crowdsourced human raters can bottleneck how much data you can get to efficiently improve these algorithms. So as the technology gets faster, as the algorithms get better at this labeling, you'll see more and more used in this machine learning. And that ties into SGE, the Search Generative Experience, Google's AI snapshot results that may or may not be coming out, but they're still experimenting on it. And the ability to label, which ties back to the webinar I'm talking about, where Andrea Volpini is going to talk all about how to use AI to label your website and provide Google with as much information. So when it's an algorithm or when it's an LLM evaluating your content, it can understand more effectively exactly what you're all about. Highly recommend you read Dawn's article. It is epic. It's a deep dive. It goes into machine learning, quality rating, these technical advancements, these patents, and what that potentially means going forward, assuming that Google is most likely going to adopt this in the future. What does that mean for your site? Okay, so we had this Indiana Jones-ish moment in SEO that happened last week, which is fascinating. So Juan Gonzalez Villa of USEO went down this rabbit hole. He's looking at the antitrust documents of Google and the DOJ. Some transcript mentions this engineer named Stephen Baker. He's like, oh, are there any, specific patents tied to this engineer? And lo and behold, what did Juan find? Generative summaries for search results. In essence, he pretty much discovered the patent that is behind how the search generative experience works, which is really interesting. And how we're going to unpack it is he basically breaks it down in terms of how Google will take the query, find the relevant documents, create a summary based on those, what's considered the relevant documents. Then it can update the summary with links and references. And then another update will assess the level of confidence that it is the generative output is accurate. So these kind of versions of summaries that keep getting updated can include text, can include images, videos, multimodal, but it breaks it all down. And Juan kind of lays it out for you of what he sees in the patent. It's really interesting, the implications of that, because it gives you some insight in terms of how Google is ultimately looking at the content to generate AI. And I wasn't familiar with this confidence level. Right now, you're seeing it in Bard where it's color coded. So if it's green, it's super high confident. If it's orange, it's somewhat confident, but not as much. We haven't seen that necessarily implemented in the search generative experience experiment yet, but it's something to keep an eye on in terms of like, what do different colors mean? And maybe that was the original, color usage. Either way, great patent, great find by Juan Gonzalez Villa. Definitely check out his explanation. Indiana Jones of SEO, he's on it. Last Friday, Jake Ward of the AI generative software tool Byword posted a post on X and set off an explosive discussion in the SEO community. First off, setting the scene, he claimed that he stole, his words, 3.6 million visits and traffic from a competitor by, in essence, using Ahrefs and his tool to find their entire sitemap, create thousands of articles based on titles from that sitemap, publish them to the site of one of his clients, and ultimately earn traffic going his way. Now, this was in the Excel tips sort of topic sphere of authority. And there were two main camps in response to Jake's tweet. A lot of SEOs had a major problem with the ethics of using generative AI content to, in essence, scrape a site, take all of their like URLs and their titles and their topic strategy, and create a competitor site with garbage content. Like the actual content wasn't super helpful. It was generative AI content that hadn't really been edited. It would just published at scale and benefit from that. On the other hand, a lot of SEOs are in the camp of, well, this is something we in essence do manually and shouldn't be frowned upon. It's actually a smarter strategy as opposed to working harder. It's efficient. Now, this isn't black and white. And it's a very interesting conversation in the context of generative AI. Shout out to J.H. Sherk, who actually identified the client as causal and looked at the actual articles and, giving Excel tips that weren't accurate. There wasn't any sort of visuals or images supporting it. It was really just spewed out content that wasn't edited by a person. And I think that's where we start to get into this gray area. Ultimately, if Google gives rewards that type of content, then more people are going to do that, and it's going to make the internet a worse place. And ultimately, users lose. As a business, do you care about that? Well, maybe not if you don't have that sort of ethic. And I don't want to be virtue signaling, but the other argument people were making is you're doing this top of funnel content that ultimately is not going to drive any tangible revenue for the business. It's superficial vanity traffic. Nobody's going to go to these sites and say, oh, here's a business I respect. Let me, go ahead and give them my money when they see it's obviously AI generated content. What ends up happening is it gives this perspective of generative AI when it's used improperly as this blanket concept of that it's just crap no matter what, which isn't the case. Now, it really makes you have to look at the strategy. If you just want a bunch of traffic, like if you have ads on a website and you're generating money through that, it's really shady, but it works, right? Like you have to decide whether or not you're okay with doing that, but it's not sustainable. In fact, once this became a big brouhaha, like all over Twitter, there's a perception that Google might have actually went in with a manual penalty because Ross Hudgens looked at the results on SEMrush and Ahrefs and actually found that since then, their traffic is tanked. They've almost kind of been de-indexed in a lot of capacity, and maybe calling them out and embarrassing Google got those types of results. But it speaks to the bigger issue of, can you produce a bunch of unedited generative AI content at scale and get millions in traffic for a short period of time? And until Google figures out how to identify this with all the different signals of whether it's real or AI, people are going to continue to do it. And it's a real problem that Google needs to continue to deal with. That said, very curious to hear your perspective. Like I said, there's a lot of gray areas in terms of ethics, generative AI, business strategy, quality content. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. So another low-key bombshell in the world of generative AI and SEO. This time, Sports Illustrated kind of got caught by Maggie Harrison of Futurism. She wrote a journalism piece, basically how they created fake AI authors for a range of different articles, created bios for them and everything. Supposedly, allegedly, also actually created AI content, which, was pointed out by Maggie, an example of like how one author writes how you can only play volleyball as long as you have a ball, otherwise it's tricky. Not the greatest content. Anyway, Sports Illustrated and their ownership group, the Arena Group, denied everything. They blamed it somewhat on a third-party content creator called Advon and said it was mostly for their reviews content, but it wasn't published on the site. Out of nowhere, these authors disappeared from their site for the most part, and the damage is done. The reputation is hit. A lot of readers and people who see this have responded angrily, feeling deceived that, they'd use AI writers for this content. And it makes sense, right? Like if you think something that you're interested in, your hobby, your passion, sports, whatever you name it, is written by someone who's fake, by an AI generated content, and it has an emotional connection, you'd feel deceived and upset. If it's just an summary that you wouldn't expect to actually matter, be connected to, that might be different. But when it's actually tied to content that matters to you, people aren't happy to find out that's written by generative AI writers, especially when that's not transparent. I'd imagine it'd be a slightly different example if they were saying this is an AI writer written by AI, as long as it's not just bad content to begin with. However, it speaks to the ethics around AI generated content and how mainstream media feels about it. Obviously, if you are not transparent about it and then you get caught, that always is going to look bad and have a brand risk, to your reputation. That said, there are appropriate ways to incorporate AI into your workflow. Example that isn't like using ChatGPT, but like using Grammarly to update your grammar, or spell check in any sort of like word processor. That's a type of AI, even though it's the most simple form. So the levels of using AI and how you edit it will still matter, but you don't want to get caught in a situation where you're creating bad content that's mostly AI generated by fake people, passing them off as real without it being any tongue-in-cheek and not expecting consequences from your audience. I'd be curious your take on that. So, of course, incredibly relevant in the context of Jake Ward's post and the Sports Illustrated story and our ongoing discussions around generative AI and ethics. In fact, we had Brittany Muller on the Rankable podcast a few weeks ago talking all about it. We published a really awesome, great guest post by Valentina Izzo and Amelia Georgievska of WordLift all around the ethical use of AI in content creation. It addresses a lot of these issues around how generative AI can play a role in your marketing and SEO to create better content at scale responsibly, right? These tools can allow you to do some really cool things, but there are so many considerations that you need to considerations. I did it. Okay, we're leaving that in. But we're talking about biases, the training data that's used for these LLMs to generate content. Was it trained on? It's important to know that. A lot of these LLMs are not transparent. Copycat content, what is exact plagiarism? What is nuanced? What is derivative? This is a bigger conversation in the context of creativity and originality. There are some people who argue that LLMs cannot generate original content. I personally disagree with that. Any sort of concepts that are synthesized together, sure, it might be a spicy autocomplete as mentioned by Ram Fishkin of SparkToro, but it's still original, unique content. You could say, take this idea, and combine them together in a new way. That's the nature of creativity. Coming up with derivations. You've seen this over the course of history with art, coming up derivatives, but you do want to be able to give credit to original sources, especially when it's obvious. It's not like you can watch a movie, spark an idea, create something completely original, and then it's only due to the credit of the original movie. That's not how people and humans and creativity work. All that said, really interesting breakdown by Valentina. So thankful for her work on iPullRank. Definitely check out that article, relevant when you're using generative AI content in any sort of content creation on your website for SEO. And finally, staying in that world of generative AI, a really cool article by Paul Shapiro all about how you can build a custom GPT with ChatGPT that can take in real data from third-party APIs. He actually breaks it down in terms of the context of using data for SEO search volume to be able to build this custom GPT so you can ask it questions about search volume that are actually real-time and up-to-date. It does an API call. It's an action that he shows you how to configure when you're setting up your custom GPT, and then start to do a whole bunch of very interesting SEO-related keyword research. Super cool article, and just highlights that, we're moving more and more towards this combination of LLMs and knowledge and actual information, and the tools are becoming much easier to integrate to do yourself. So you don't actually need to be a developer in order to take advantage of some of these tools. Same with Zapier, it's connected in there, and there's so many different APIs. So read through that article, and obviously you can actually use ChatGPT to help you configure it as well. Really cool. So still unpacking the public documents involved in the 2020 DOJ versus Google antitrust trial, right? So Kevin Indig in his growth memo published a great article talking about this elephant in the room that Google uses user behavior to influence search rankings. Remember, Google actually does, based on these documents, look at clicks to the website, how long you're on the website, engagement signals, which they're able to track through Chrome and mobile devices and YouTube and all these different unified properties to be able to inform whether the results are what a user expects. And Kevin points out, 15% of any query is new. So Google needs to be able to understand and predict what the user is looking for. So our whole mental model, the way we used to think about SEO in terms of content, the biggest layer, backlinks, and then maybe user signals and interactions, should actually be flipped based on this reveal, that user interactions are really important and clutch, that backlinks are kind of, the next biggest thing still, and then content under that. However, it has been 3 years since those documents were initially put together and revealed, meaning that advancements in LLMs and AI and understanding things like the rollout of passage rankings in 2021, where Google can look at individual snippets and really understand semantically from the quantitative of words, embeddings, vector embeddings, understand the words, that they can actually do a better job of providing relevance based on content and not just the quality raters that we pointed out. Because remember, it's all about labeling and semantic associations, the relationship between things in your content, and not just completely dependent on user behavior. But Kevin, kind of makes that great argument of why did they not just explicitly explain it in the first place around, the reality is user signals and behavior is gameable. Like you can, in theory, have someone click, 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 or bots or whatever. And how good is Google at catching those if we become really sophisticated with the way we do our user engagement? Google wants to maintain that competitive advantage. It's not just every single thing counts. It's like what specifically counts and how much is it weighted. We still don't know that. And in fact, their point, Googlers don't know that. Googlers don't know the insides and outs of how the user behavior is going to impact the rankings and why that matters. And then finally, okay, the reality is if you're on the internet, everyone's kind of tracking you, no matter what, mechanisms the EU puts in place. In America, it's not that great as well, as aside from California, you're being tracked, right? But Google doesn't want you to feel like you're being tracked. Everything that you're doing on your phone, they can probably see. And, that would be a problem for, consumer trust if, they know and they're thinking constantly that they're tracking you, which they are. Anyway, it's an interesting conversation. The implications are frustrating and yet obvious for anyone who's a conspiracy theorist or always talking about SEO myths. It's hard not to rethink anything that Google says. And despite all of the people representing Google are awesome people, Danny Sullivan and John Mueller and Martin Splitt and Lizzie Sussman, all of them are good people with great intentions, but underneath the hood, it's important to always have a skeptical and critical eye at how SEO operates. It's a hard job. And sometimes it's not magic. Sometimes the most obvious answer is the answer, Occam's razor, right? But either way, it is getting more sophisticated. It's so easy to both overestimate Google and underestimate them at the same time. What do you think in the context of user behavior? It was actually extremely challenging to come up with a narrative for the SEO Weekly this week because of all the news and content that was published and all the overlap of these topics. There's so much that's tied together, whether it's generative AI, LLMs, ethics, the way that they're actually labeling content with quality rater guidelines and how that's adjusting from humans to using LLMs. Then you have the whole DOJ antitrust suit against Google and the documents released there and how we're learning more and more about user behavior. It's a whole lot and it's all connected. Well, there was another interesting tidbit from the antitrust DOJ that Cyrus Shepard of Zippy pointed out when he looked at a transcript by Pandu Nayak talking all about Google's index. And for the first time, we have a good sense of the index. We've never really known how many documents Google has indexed. And he actually said it was around 600 billion documents. That is a ton of information. Now, what was really interesting was, contrary to what you might expect, it's not always growing. It's not always adding more and more documents, despite the fact that there's so much more content being added to the web. And let's be real, a lot of the generative AI content is kind of crap and doesn't even need to be indexed anyway. It's Google's job to identify what's actually helpful to users. In fact, Nayak points out, Google's index isn't about making a complete record of all documents, but indexing enough pages to satisfy users. The quote is, making sure that when users come to us with queries, we want to make sure that we've indexed enough of the web so we can serve those queries. And so that's why the index is such a crucial piece of the puzzle. So it's fascinating to know that there's 600 billion documents being indexed, but that it's not always up and to the right. It goes up and down. And it makes sense. Google wants to make sure that the index is fresh. If outdated content's on there, that's not as helpful. That it actually is cost effective. That much actually costs a ton of money. And that is a realistic consideration of Google. They're providing this free service, but with the advertising, they do make a ton of revenue. There's a limited amount of money and resources they can spend. And, compare the document size, how, expansive and complex these documents are, these websites are, these pages are now compared to 5-10 years ago. They're a lot bigger, it costs even more. So indexing 100 million documents today versus 100 million 5 years ago, it's almost astronomically larger in size. It all makes sense. It's an interesting conversation as we see potentially Google index less and less content. It means that the quality and the helpfulness of your content needs to be that much better. It's an issue that many SEOs are dealing with and trying to figure out for their individual site. So there's a lot of talk about all that's wrong with generative AI. And so on the other side of the equation is the humanity, the humanness behind content, and how to make sure that Google understands that you are a real person, that you have expertise or experience or authoritativeness or trustworthiness, and how that should actually benefit your content and your rankings and your visibility. Remember, these are signals, not ranking factors, but really great article by James Brockbank on Digital Loft talking all about page examples of author pages that actually brilliantly demonstrate EEAT. And, it makes sense. A lot of the examples come from your money, your life types of pages. We're talking financials like NerdWallet or Investopedia, some medical sites, and then just some more fun e-commerce examples, but showing a little personality. But he goes through, some of the best case practices, and obviously another one from an SEO publisher, SEO journal. Search engine journal, excuse me. But he shows examples of, having the author and having their title and having their other posts and having a little blurb about them and a little bit of their mission statement. And all of these signals, all of this content can be used to enhance your knowledge graph, what Google understands about you, which can position you more as an expert for any other content on the internet that you produce and publish. Great article by James there. Do you have any other examples that you love when it comes to author pages? If you haven't improved your author page, maybe you should go and work on that, right now. So last quarter, Glen Allsopp of Detailed started to he puts together these really great content pieces where he goes deep diving into the businesses of SEO and the SEO of business. Basically, he looks at the massive digital Goliaths, the media conglomerates that own a bunch of different, media publishing sites, almost 86% of the top published content on the web. And what he does is he looks at the earnings calls, he goes through a bunch of different insights and publications and communications, compiles it, and shares that insights with us. Now, 3 months ago, he did his first one of Q1 for 2023, and it was a big hit. So he's back with Q2. It's an epic piece, and he has a lot of really interesting pieces that he shares. For instance, like Nextdoor announced that they built 300,000 pages of AI generated content relevant to our other conversations, or that GQ and Vogue and The Verge all block Google Extended. So the LLMs like Bard from scraping their content and incorporating it into their data set or being able to use it for their generative AI. Problematic. Anyway, he goes through it. Highly recommend you check out this post. Like, it goes on and on and on with insights of SEO strategies, what they're doing for, their review sites, or how much traffic they're getting. They're seeing, traffic declines from SimilarWeb, all those things like that. Great job, Glenn. Awesome article. Awesome deep dive. I hope you keep doing those quarterly roundups. They're very valuable. So while we did not have an episode of the SEO Weekly last week due to Thanksgiving, I did record 2 awesome Rankable podcasts that I'd love for you to check out. They were actually kind of related. The first one was Bernard Huang, who is the co-founder of ClearScope, and we talked all about topic maturity, search intent, information gain. It's such an interesting concept, the idea of depending on how, old your topic is or new and fresh and changing your topic is, that's going to influence your SEO strategy and the search results and how search intent is actually evolving. You know what? Let me have Bernard explain one of his takes when it comes to topic maturity.
There's a lot of different factors at play. And the theory that I'm recommending or subscribing to is what I call SERP similarity. And you could also think of it as topic maturity. So topic maturity or SERP similarity would refer to this idea that more or less everybody that is contributing to the topic from a content perspective agrees that the, X is X. Like more or less, right? We all are in accordance that, this content is true, it's relevant, it's helpful. And in very extreme cases of high confidence similarity, we'll call these lyrics, right? I mean, lyrics are lyrics. You can't, everybody agrees they're the same, right? And, grammar sites, right? How you use an N dash versus an M dash is mostly all the same as well, right? I think of those as high confidence similarity searches. So in those particular veins, the copycat type content, which is to say, how can we do this, better, add a little bit more? It actually works, right? Like, I think that's really the takeaway, right? If you're writing about, what is A/B testing or what is search engine optimization, how you beat your competitors is by providing more comprehensive, more relevant content in the evolutionary paths that content is likely to be taking. The good example within search engine optimization would be if you talked about what is SEO, you got to talk about AI, GPT, LLMs. And a lot of existing content maybe doesn't, or maybe they're in the process of refreshing and updating their content so that it does.
So there you go. Check out that entire interview is on YouTube and the iPullRank blog for Rankable. I also got the privilege of interviewing Victor Pan of HubSpot, and HubSpot has been a massive success due to inbound marketing and SEO. We talked about all search intent and data voids and the content wars. Data voids are a really interesting thing. As I mentioned, they're 15% of all queries are brand new. So how do you actually make sure that you have relevant content for those brand new queries that have never been asked before? Here's Victor's take on the data void.
There's playing the game, and then there's creating something novel. And this actually brings up another problem in search that's worth discussing. It's this concept of a data void. So for those who don't know in the audience, there's a research paper from Bing where they realized, hey, there's a lot of queries that's coming out of nowhere. And those areas are actually from social. So people will coin terms or create ridiculous combinations. Old school SEOs will know this as Google bombing, like miserable failure used to show up the US president, George W. Bush, because enough people on the internet started, linking images with anchor text of miserable failure to, our ex-president. And so these queries are popping out of nowhere, right? And what can search engines rely on? Well, they don't have data from social. It's coming out of nowhere. There's a lot of pages optimized by SEOs on these terms or random internet people, and that's the most relevant result now, right? Because that's the only thing that matches to the document. And so on one end, that's one answer. How do we solve that? We start creating new queries in combinations never seen before and popularize them elsewhere. So that would be branded queries. And that's one strategy. Another strategy is to co-opt an existing term and turn it into a different meaning. Let me give you an example. HubSpot for the longest time was trying to solve this problem for our customers, which was they were not internally linking the content they were creating. So we were deciding whether to call, this new idea, it's not new, of interlinking, I think it was either topic clusters, which by the way was originally a statistical term, right? Like, and or I think it was like hub and spokes or some other name. Again, SEOs, some other SEOs probably had the same name, and then they're gonna like, I was first. I don't care. Like what we were trying to solve straightforward was like, how do we get people to interlink, especially our customers? And we ended up going with topic clusters because we were trying to look for like patterns and how like Googlers would kind of reference like how they think about things. The word topic came up a lot. And so we were just like, oh, we should do that. It'll sound like we kind of knew what Google was doing. But at the same time, suddenly the statistical term is now like a marketing term.
So there you go. Really awesome interviews and conversations thinking about search intent and how it's evolving. With Victor, we actually talked a lot about the DOJ stuff and the user behavior signals coming out. So more of a deep dive into that as well. I have a few more interviews through the rest of the year before we take a little bit of a break for Rankable, but keep your eyes peeled. Excited for a couple more of our guests coming up. Another episode of the SEO Weekly in the books. As always, my name is Garrett Sussman of iPullRank. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel, give us a like, leave us a comment, share with your very best SEO friend or someone who's obsessed with generative AI, because you know they would enjoy this stuff. Anyway, thank you again. Only a couple more episodes before the end of the year. I hope you enjoyed it. I will catch you next week. Peace.